Sam stood at the conference room door, his hand hovering over the handle. Inside, a dozen colleagues waited, expecting a showdown. He had the data, the arguments, the perfect rebuttal to every point his rival would make. For weeks, he'd prepared for this moment, fueled by the sting of a previous, public dismissal. His heart beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drum of anticipation for a victory he could almost taste. But as his fingers touched the cool metal, a different feeling surfaced, a quiet, heavy emptiness. It wasn't fear, it was the memory of the last time he'd won. The hollow applause, the forced smiles, the sleepless night that followed a battle that cost him his peace. The real fight, he realized in that still moment, wasn't in the room. It was right here, at the threshold. For as long as he could remember, Sam had built his worth on a foundation of other people's approval. In school, it was the gold star, the top grade, the teacher's nod. In his career, it became the promotion, the winning argument, the visible sign that he was smart, capable, respected. Every disagreement was a hill to die on, every critique a personal challenge to be met with overwhelming force. He became known as someone you didn't cross, a formidable opponent. And for a while, it worked. He won debates. He got his way. People would concede, sometimes with a grudging admiration for his tenacity. But the victories felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The respect he craved was conditional, fleeting. It lasted only until the next challenge arose. After each confrontation, a strange emptiness would settle in his chest. He'd replay the exchange, not with pride, but with a critical eye, searching for flaws in his own performance. The approval of others became a drug, and he needed a bigger hit each time to feel the same effect. The high of winning was always followed by a crash of solitude. The turning point came during a team meeting a month prior. A junior colleague had presented an idea that Sam had considered and discarded weeks before. Instead of offering guidance, he'd systematically dismantled the proposal, showcasing his own superior foresight with a cascade of data. He watched the young man's face fall, the enthusiasm draining away to be replaced by deflated embarrassment. The room fell silent. Someone murmured, "Good catch, Sam." But the praise felt sour. He had won the point, but he had lost something else. He had become the obstacle. The critic, the person who shut down ideas instead of fostering them. That night, staring at the ceiling, the question surfaced from the quiet, a whisper beneath the noise of his own justifying thoughts. What am I really trying to prove? And who am I becoming in the process? Now, facing this door, that question echoed louder than any argument he had prepared. The internal struggle was a physical sensation. One part of him, the old Sam, leaned forward onto the balls of his feet, muscles tensed for the fight. This was his arena. He could picture the sequence. His confident entrance, the sharp opening statement, the satisfying moment of proving his point. His ego hummed with the prospect. It was a familiar, almost comforting script. But another voice, quieter and deeper, urged a different movement, a step back. It was an intuition, a pull toward stillness. This voice didn't speak in words of victory or defeat. It simply asked him to notice the tightness in his shoulders, the shallow breath in his chest. It asked him to feel the weight of the performance he was about to give. The victory he sought in that room felt like a phantom. It promised fulfillment but would deliver only another cycle of hunger and strain. He thought of the junior colleague's face. He thought of the hollow feeling. The voice of reason, his own wiser self, cut through the noise. It said, "The respect you want isn't in there. It can't be handed to you by people you've beaten into agreement. It has to be built, slowly, from the inside." The decision crystallized not as a surrender, but as a choice of a different kind of strength. It was the strength to defy his own compulsions, to break a pattern that no longer served him. His hand, which had been poised to push the door open, now relaxed. He slowly lowered it to his side. He took a single, deliberate step backward. The movement felt unnatural, like walking against a strong current. The pressure was immense. The expectation of the room, the voice of his own ambition screaming that this was weakness. But beneath that noise, a new sensation emerged. A faint, surprising lightness. It was the first small taste of a freedom he hadn't known he was seeking. He turned and walked away, not in retreat, but toward a different path entirely. The battle he left behind in the conference room was an old game. The real work had just begun. The walk back to his desk was the longest of his life. The air in the open-plan office felt thick with unspoken judgment. He could feel eyes on him, the silent questions. Where is he going? Did he forget something? Is he chickening out? He kept his gaze fixed ahead, his posture steady, but inside, a storm of self-doubt raged. The old programming screamed that he had made a catastrophic error. He had shown weakness. He had forfeited his position. He imagined the whispers starting the moment the conference room door closed behind him, the smug satisfaction of his rival. The urge to turn around, to march back and reclaim his moment, was a physical ache. It felt like leaving a part of himself behind. He sat at his desk, the screen a blur. The initial discomfort was a cold wave, washing over him. He had stepped off the well-worn path of confrontation and landed in unknown territory. For the next hour, he was useless. He opened emails but didn't read them. He picked up a pen but didn't write. His mind was a courtroom, and the prosecution, the voice of his old self, was relentless. You've lost all credibility. They'll see you as unreliable. You've just handed him the win. The turmoil was so loud he almost missed the subtle shift. It began as a quiet space opening up behind the noise. The frantic energy that had been fueling his anxiety started to dissipate, leaving behind a strange calm. The lightness he had felt at the door began to grow, not as a triumphant feeling, but as a simple absence of weight. The tension in his neck, a constant companion for years, began to loosen its grip. He took a deep breath, and it felt like the first full breath he'd taken all day. He hadn't run away from a fight, he had chosen not to have one. The difference, he realized, was everything. Over the next few days, he watched people's perceptions shift, not in dramatic ways, but in small, significant glances. The junior colleague he had previously criticized approached him tentatively, not with fear, but with a genuine question. A manager from another department nodded to him in the hallway with a look that wasn't about his debating skills, but something more thoughtful. The respect he had been trying to claw from others through dominance began to trickle in through a different channel: consistency. He was still the same competent person, but the sharp, defensive edges had softened. People weren't bracing for a fight when they interacted with him. They were starting to listen. This was the crucial distinction he was learning. The difference between a fear-based retreat and a strength-based choice. Retreat is born of panic, a desperate flight from a threat. What he had done was not that. It was a conscious, difficult decision to disengage from a dynamic that served no one, himself included. It required more strength to walk away from that door than it would have to charge through it. One was a reaction, the other was a response. And people, he was starting to see, can sense the difference. That single choice to walk away became a key that unlocked a new way of being. It didn't magically solve all his problems, but it made future choices clearer. The next time a minor disagreement arose in a project meeting, the old urge to dominate the conversation surfaced. But now he had a reference point. He remembered the feeling of lightness after the conference room. Instead of launching into a point-by-point rebuttal, he found himself saying, "That's an interesting perspective. Let me think about that." The room didn't collapse. The world didn't end. In fact, the conversation became more collaborative. He was learning to engage without needing to conquer. He began to develop his own internal metrics for success. Instead of measuring his day by the number of arguments won or approvals gained, he started noticing smaller things. Did he leave a conversation feeling connected or drained? Did he act in alignment with the person he wanted to be, rather than the persona he thought he needed to project? This internal compass was far more reliable than the fickle applause of the external world. The hunger for external validation began to quiet, replaced by a growing sense of self-respect that was not dependent on anyone else's opinion. He noticed a paradox beginning to unfold. The less he needed to prove himself, the more his influence seemed to grow. When he stopped fighting for the spotlight, people began to seek out his quiet confidence. When he listened more than he spoke, his words carried more weight. He was gaining a different kind of respect, one that was rooted not in fear of his intellect, but in trust of his character. It was slower to build, but its foundation was solid. It was respect that came from a place of genuine strength, not the brittle facade of always being right. This new strength was found in selective engagement. He didn't become a pushover. He was still firm on his principles and clear about his boundaries. But he became strategic. He saved his energy for the battles that truly mattered, the ones aligned with his core values, rather than wasting it on every minor skirmish that threatened his ego. He learned that walking away from one thing wasn't an act of loss, it was an act of creation. It created space. Space for reflection, for genuine connection, for the things that truly mattered to grow. The final, quiet realization settled over him like a warm blanket. The respect he had been searching for his entire life had never been an outside job. It was an inside job, built one small, conscious choice at a time. And he had just laid the most important brick. The real work began in the small, quiet moments after the big decision. Sam realized that the conference room was just a single test. Respect wasn't built in one grand gesture, but in the accumulation of daily, almost invisible choices. It became a practice, a new muscle he had to strengthen. He started noticing the subtle invitations to engage in the old patterns. A slightly terse email that in the past would have triggered a lengthy, defensive reply. Now, he'd pause. He'd take a breath, 4 counts in, a gentle hold, then a slow release. Instead of firing back, he might write a single line. Thanks for your note. Let's discuss this briefly when you have a moment. The urge to prove a point was still there, a low hum in the background, but he was learning to give his energy a different job. He was learning to let the small waves of annoyance pass through him without needing to build a wall against them. This practice extended beyond arguments to the countless unnecessary commitments that drained his time and energy. He began to notice the automatic, yes, that would jump to his lips when asked to take on a low-priority task. He started asking a simple, internal question. Does this align with what truly matters to me? Saying, no, felt awkward at first, like wearing a new pair of shoes. But with each respectful decline, he felt a small piece of himself return. He was no longer scattering his energy to the winds, hoping to buy approval. He was gathering it, focusing it on the work and relationships that felt authentic. Each time he chose to walk away from a petty argument, or a draining commitment, or the need to have the last word, he deposited a small coin into a bank of self-respect. These weren't dramatic deposits, but their cumulative effect was profound. The hollow space that external validation used to fill was slowly being occupied by a quiet, steady confidence. He was building a foundation that wasn't dependent on the shifting opinions of others. This practice of letting go wasn't about losing things, it was about clearing space. It created room for deeper focus, for genuine connection, for the quiet hum of his own intuition to be heard. The final realization settled in not as a thought, but as a feeling in his chest, a sense of solidity. The respect he had chased for so long had always been an inside job, waiting for him to stop looking elsewhere and simply begin the quiet, steady work of building it himself. Sam now moves through his days with a peaceful confidence that needs no announcement. The one thing you must walk away from is the exhausting chase for external validation. Notice one small thing you can choose to release today, and feel the quiet strength that follows.